Welcome to another edition of the Big News Roundup. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. An angry Ilhan Omar accuses the Department of Homeland Security of being terrorists after President Trump links her to ISIS. Radical anti-ICE agitators lay out plans to turn Minneapolis into a total war zone by establishing 1,000 street blockades and security checkpoints throughout the entire city. And the deadly repercussions of the former Biden administration's catch and release program for illegal immigrants results in another tragic death for an innocent American citizen. Also, hypocritical China issuing a stern warning to the U.S. concerning a potential new nuclear arms race. And a loudmouth former talk show host tucks her tail between her legs and forks out a fortune for a new crib in California after ditching the U.S. for England when President Trump first returned to the White House. All this and a whole bunch more, it's coming up right now on the Big Roundup. You know, we have a great deal to get to today, and we begin with this. Following reports vaguely linking her to the terror group ISIS, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar is now turning the tables on the Trump administration and pointing her finger directly at our nation's Department of Homeland Security, accusing them of being the real terrorists. I think in politics they call that the old switcheroo. In a blistering speech on the House floor, the Somalia-born lawmaker claims that DHS was created for one purpose only, in her words, to terrorize the public while functioning as an occupying force in communities throughout the entire U.S. That's utter delusion. She goes on to say we can no longer continue to operate as if this kind of terror is acceptable in any way, that true accountability is needed immediately, and that fixing the problem begins with abolishing ICE, impeaching Kristi Noem, and rethinking our country's entire immigration policy. Well, wrong on all counts, and odd that she left out the part about the $9 billion worth of fraud in her state. I'm sure it was an honest omission. However, she doesn't stop there. In her long-winded rant, she goes on to demand immediate justice for her two fallen constituents, Renee Good and Alex Preddy, saying that her comrades were both beloved neighbors and community members who were murdered by federal immigration enforcement agents. Well, maybe there was a trial and a guilty verdict, and I missed that part. Furthermore, she's also calling for an independent investigation into their deaths, as well as into all the agencies she now accuses of actively terrorizing our country, claiming that federal authorities are currently blocking and completely stonewalling any attempt to do so. So, earlier this week, President Trump posted a news report to Truth Social regarding a deadly U.S. military strike which targeted more than a dozen ISIS leaders who were hiding out in a cave in Somalia. And in that post, he asks whether or not Omar was there to protect her corrupt homeland, in essence tying her directly to terrorism. Meanwhile, he's also repeatedly accused the Congresswoman of directly profiting from the billions of dollars of welfare fraud schemes in Minnesota, suggesting more than once that she should be jailed, deported, and sent packing to her country of origin. In reality, however, the Congresswoman has been busy kind of stirring the pot, ignoring that staggering fraud scandal completely, like it never happened, and effortlessly dodging a growing number of inquiries into her sudden and inexplicable skyrocketing wealth. Hey, by the way, if you need a loan for maybe a used Ford pickup truck, go to the Bank of Omar. Man, they got tons of dough. She's now accusing the Trump administration of turning her current home from a place of refuge into a war zone. No, she did that pretty much all on her own, and of losing sight of the admirable values that make our country great. And she argues Americans like her are going to have to fight for their future if they have any hope of ever saving humanity. Yeah, when I think of humanity, just like you, I think of Ilhan Omar. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. America, please file this story under the heading, Bless Her Little Heart. The multi-zillionaire congresswoman from Minnesota is confused about law and order. She can't distinguish between right and wrong, and her level of ignorance regarding the role that ICE agents play in a civilized society, it's alarming. And so nobody is going to abolish anything. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE. Yeah, they're a tragic bunch. They focus on smart immigration enforcement, humane detention, preventing terrorism, and combating the illegal movement of people and goods. Yeah, sounds pretty dreadful to me. That Madam Omar has a conflict with that is confusing, but if it's a deal breaker, she's more than free to call it a day. Yeah, simply leave behind that fancy six-figure government job. Pack her bags, throw her estimated $30 million in loose change into a bunch of suitcases, and then make the mad dash out of town on that next flight out of Minneapolis St. Paul International Airport. just like that. It's pretty easy. Funny thing is, over the years, they say hundreds of millions of dollars have moved through that airport, and all without any conflict at all. Also, regarding Ms. Omar's comment that Renee Good and Alex Preddy were murdered by federal immigration enforcement agents, hey, Buttercup, Ms. Ilhan, here in the USA, without formal charges, trials, and guilty verdicts, nobody murdered anybody. There's a bit more to the story, and we think you left out a whole bunch of interesting facts. Nice try. Keep trying, though, and stop manipulating the narrative. Moving along, we're going to shift our focus now to Minneapolis, where despite plans to withdraw hundreds of ICE agents from the region, radical far-left agitators now actively preparing to increase their insurgent resistance to federal authorities by setting up manned security checkpoints throughout the entire area. No fooling. Got ourselves a little bit of a vigilante. According to a new report, teams of activists and protesters already in process of setting up nearly 1,000 fortress-like street blockades in order to prevent the free passage of ICE agents within the Twin Cities. Now, the report says that while these barricades, these barriers are intended to intercept all vehicles used by federal officers, they're going to be guarded and patrolled by self-deputized agitators who plan to stop and harass any individuals when they encounter them, whether they're ICE agents or not. Be careful, Minnesota. If your Aunt Gladys tries to get through, they might rough her up just a little bit. Meanwhile, a number of those makeshift barricades are already in place and blocking the road. Self-proclaimed ICE-out protesters can be seen using stolen traffic cones, old furniture, stolen pallets, and a bunch more to build a temporary wall, halt traffic, and then shake down anyone unlucky enough to cross their path by demanding first to see their identification. And they might even go a little bit further, try to steal your lunch money. Additionally, the agitators are reportedly logging each license plate that approaches the roadblock and then compiling a comprehensive database in order to track every vehicle which they believe is currently being used by ICE agents, and all in the name of community control. Well, what could possibly go wrong? According to the reports, a number of well-known area ICE watch collectives are responsible for the city takeover, and right now they're actively trying to recruit as many people as they can to join their goofy little crusade. As a result, they're handing out a printed document that outlines their scheme, and in it, they urge their followers to basically use anything they can get their hands on to block an intersection before encouraging them to set up barricades in both local neighborhoods and on major thoroughfares as well. It remains to be seen how local Democrats, people like Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Fry, are going to respond to a hostile takeover of their city by professional insurrectionists. In the meantime, while city officials say they're already clearing some streets in the name of public safety, the agitators brag that they're simply turning around and setting up new barricades and barriers as soon as they turn the corner. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. This all sounds like a superb idea, and I've always said that whenever you don't get exactly what you want out of life, do everything you can to make life as miserable as possible for virtually everyone around you. That's the very first step. Step 2, being a vigilante is no fun when you go it alone, so gather up a bunch of your amigos and amigas. You got to be inclusive. Minnesota is kind of a DEI state. You set up a bunch of those fancy roadblocks and you keep the feds at bay. Step 3. Step 3. I don't think they have a step 3 yet. It's not that far ahead yet. Step 3 is kind of like one of those goofy websites you want to look at, but when you dial in, you're met with one of those ugly, cruel, currently under construction signs telling you to check back at a later date. We'll check back on step 3. Oh, and speaking of construction, these upstanding cretins, they are fabrication geniuses. Yeah, they're the real deal, and here's how they plan to build these heavily fortified no-pass zones. They'll use stolen traffic cones, barrels, and a bunch of other nifty junk, all reinforced with wood scaffolding, maybe a couple of mattresses, some old furniture, storage pallets, all propped up against the perimeter. Pretty much how they assemble big office buildings in third world countries, which are prone to any number of natural disasters. And again, what could possibly go wrong? Now I'm just kind of thinking out loud, but heavily fortified ICE agents in their patrol vehicles, or even one of those armored vehicles. Editor Prana, a picture of a Bearcat, if you would, please. If they're smart, they better steer clear of those roadblocks. Last thing ICE agents ever want to encounter is a makeshift barricade with rubber cones and wooden pallets. I'll tell you, I'm not one to give advice to anybody in law enforcement, but these roadblockers, they're a group of folks who give me pause for concern. A full disclosure, though, one time back in 1993, I got beat up by a bunch of 9-year-old school kids from Girl Scout Troop 109, so generally, I'm pretty easily frightened. Hey, bottom line, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, sounds like you got everything under control. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if your city council gives you a bonus this year, and all for running a very tight ship. All right, change things up just a bit and take a closer look at the awful repercussions of the former Biden administration's catch and release policy concerning illegal immigrants who crossed our southern border. Now, according to federal authorities, an individual from Colombia who was caught entering our country illegally back in 2023 and then set free by Team Biden is now responsible for killing an innocent American citizen. They say the suspect was recently spotted driving erratically on the streets of Southern California before eventually becoming involved in a high-speed chase with local cops. Now, that pursuit ended when the illegal immigrant crashed his Jeep into a car driven by a 59-year-old guy who then died at the scene of the accident. Since that time, the suspect has been charged with homicide, and right now he's awaiting trial in a local lockup. Additionally, ICE has already lodged an immigration detainer against him, hoping to eventually get their hands on him and give him the boot out of the country. However, as of now, that seems highly unlikely because thanks to California's current sanctuary state laws, local authorities are not obligated to work with ICE in any way and transfer criminal illegals into their custody. And for their part, ICE says that if local officials ever release the suspect back out onto the streets, they'll put all Californians at extreme risk. I agree, as well as force them to go out into the community, track him down themselves, and then rearrest them on their own. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's how it all pans out. Now, some people say it's a bad idea to vilify illegal immigrants, and they say give them a break. Also, in case you missed it, a number of prominent city and state leaders down in Minnesota, they wholeheartedly agree. Over there, they say just because people have violated federal laws by entering the country illegally, that shouldn't mean they should face any consequences. You know, it's not just Minnesota. Right here in the perpetually sunny and hot state of California, our governor, Gavin Newsom, he didn't invent the notion of protecting illegal immigrants. He simply perfected the practice. And look what this has led to. You got a guy who to this day is still here illegally, although behind bars, and while being pursued by local cops for a simple traffic violation he took off, crashes his car being driven by a respectable, law-abiding citizen who unfortunately ends up dying. Nothing short of a tragic, multi-tiered failure. Benefactor Biden and his administration's ill-thought-out catch and release program was a waste of time, effort, and resources. To be clear, sanctuary states are clearly not aligned with providing safety and protection for all residents, and this is not an isolated incident. Look, you'll recall that Laken Riley was also killed by an illegal immigrant back in 2024. Her killer was also caught entering the U.S. illegally, later released. Her murderer never should have been here, and Riley, right now, should still be with us. When the states go against federal law enforcement and protect illegal immigrants who oftentimes go on to commit additional crimes, it's a tragedy for absolutely everybody. We'll continue now with a story concerning the immediate fallout from the recent expiration of our nation's last remaining nuclear deal with Russia. In a patronizing display of utter hypocrisy, Communist China now urging our country to work hand in hand with Moscow and find enough common ground for a new treaty before the start of an out-of-control nuclear arms race. Good job, China. Get the U.S. and Russia to scale back while you ramp up. I'm on to you. Right now, the Chinese Communist regime claims that a nuclear pact between the U.S. and Russia is the key to global stability, and without it, there's a significant threat to the entire international nuclear order. This is a big deal. They're also backing a proposed one-year extension on the current deal that's been offered by Russia, calling it a responsible solution to the immediate problem. Now look at China trying to be the grown-up in the room and call all the shots. However, in typical communist fashion, China is completely rejecting any suggestion that they should sign on to any type of arms control pact themselves. In the meantime, they're rapidly increasing their own nuclear stockpile by leaps and bounds, and the Pentagon estimates that right now, the communist regime already has their hands on more than 600 extremely destructive warheads. Now, a couple of additional headlines that we're keeping a very close watch on here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, President Trump warning Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Khomeini, that he should be very worried as our two nations engage in a critical summit in the Middle East to hash out our disagreements over Tehran's nuclear program, which I thought we obliterated. Moving along, a new report reveals that last year, Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders spent over $550,000 in campaign funds to charter a private jet as part of his Fight Oligarchy tour that crisscrossed the U.S. And in the world of journalism, I remember newspapers from way back when. A surprising Gofundme drive has already raised nearly $400,000 in donations, all to help out hundreds of reporters who were unexpectedly laid off by the venerable Washington Post newspaper earlier this week. Yeah, people just loved that paper way back when. And Jeff Bezos, the owner of that used to be fine publication. And now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, and we kick things off today with an obnoxious former talk show host who now seems to be all bark and no bite. After promising to leave our country forever following the re-election of President Trump, unfunny comedian Ellen DeGeneres has apparently had a complete change of heart and now dropping 27 million clams to buy a luxurious California mansion because she reportedly misses the horse scene and the weather. Yeah, sunny Southern California. Now, look, this is why I like Rosie O'Donnell a bunch better than Ellen DeGeneres. They both pulled up stakes and departed the USA because Donald J. Trump, the war-ending, economy-growing, border-protecting president, yeah, he was just too much to handle. Kind of overwhelming. Now, while Ellen has come crawling back and hopefully wearing one of those cool red MAGA hats, Rosie is standing her ground, living abroad and still boycotting the homeland. I have no idea how much longer our nation can actually survive, though, without Rosie O'Donnell. Please come back. And in the world of music, a bittersweet update concerning legendary crooner Barry Manilow. Following successful surgery and treatment for a recent bout of lung cancer, the legendary singer now says he's unfortunately been forced to postpone his upcoming Las Vegas residency. Also says he's getting better every day, feeling better as well. Plans to resume his concert tour by the end of this month. And in a related note, a guy called LaMonte McLemore, who you might not recognize that name, but he's a legend. He was the lead singer and the founding member of the vocal group The Fifth Dimension. Sadly, he has passed away at the age of 90. And among the group's biggest hits, Up, Up, and Away, also Aquarius, Let the Sun Shine In, and a whole bunch more. And back to Barry Manilow for a guy who's been writing, recording, touring, and performing all over the planet and for a number of decades. I say Barry Manilow deserves a break today. And the odd thing is, Barry Manilow wrote the McDonald's You Deserve a Break Today jingle all those years ago. Fine tie-in. Even more odd, turns out he didn't write one of his biggest hits called I Write the Songs. That was actually written by a guy called Bruce Johnston from the legendary Beach Boys. Barry Manilow, get well soon and get yourself back on that stage. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. If you haven't done so already, it's right there, the old subscribe button. Just hit it. And with that, we're going to dim the lights. Gosh, the weekend is almost here. Let's gently fade to black. We'll see you right back here next time as well for another episode of the Big News Roundup.